We got a huge update that's coming out for the 2025 NFL Draft, and that is that Mel Kiper has officially dropped a new top 25 big board. And we're going to talk about some of these guys that he ultimately has ranked. We're going to talk about some of the guys he has a little bit lower than where I would have them, and I kind of want to just give you guys my analysis and just kind of go over some of these players. One of the things I've realized over the last couple of days is the 2025 NFL Draft is going to produce a lot of good football players. I think there's a misconception that the class isn't that good. Some positions are a little bit better than others, but I think generally speaking, we're going to get a ton of high quality players out of this class. Let's get right into it. So we got Travis Hunter as the number one player on this class. I 100% agree with it. You know, early on, I was thinking to myself that, hey, if you want a corner, go get Will Johnson. If you want a wide receiver, go get Luther Burden. And the thing is, you know, if Travis Hunter played one position or the other, he'd probably be the best at it. But since he doesn't play one position, I almost feel like you might want to go with a different guy, right? Like Will Johnson, for example, I would still argue is the best corner in this class. But with Travis Hunter, I think he's the best overall player, and not just because he plays both ways, right? Because at the end of the day, he's not going to play both ways in the NFL, right? It's just very, very difficult to do. You got to learn essentially two different playbooks, all the different calls, all the different things. Over the course of the week, is he going to be able to game plan and you know, essentially get ready for both offense and defense? Probably not, right? But I still think Travis Hunter is the best pure player in this class. If he turns into a full-time corner, I think he can be one of the best corners in the NFL. If he turns into a pure wide receiver, I think he can be one of the best wide receivers as well. He's that talented, but it's just a matter of him actually making that transition. I think it was a mistake for him to come into this year and go both ways with Colorado. I think he should have picked one position. I still think he'll be a top 10 overall pick. I don't think it's guaranteed that he's the number one overall pick, and I don't think it's guaranteed he's the first wide receiver or corner taken. Right? Nothing's guaranteed. Some of the scouts that I've spoken to also agree with me, right? The corner position, Will Johnson's the best corner, and although Mel Kiper has Travis Hunter 1, he has Will Johnson 2. And I agree with it. I mean, I'm almost, you know, this close to putting Will Johnson as my number one overall player. Johnson to me is one of those guys that's he's just different, right? He's absolutely different. You know, you can look at some cornerbacks and you know, they bust out as they kind of get into the NFL. Will Johnson has a very, very, very low chance of actually busting out. Like this guy, I think is as pro ready as you know one could essentially be. And to me, Will Johnson's the guy that I would 100% take. And in fact, I think Will Johnson's going to be a top 3 pick. I think he'll probably be the first non-quarterback taken. If not, he'll probably be the second non-quarterback taken. I love his tape, and I'm not surprised that Mel Kiper has this guy ranked that high. Abdul Carter is another guy that I really like. Mel Kiper has him number 3. It's interesting because Mel Kiper just 2 weeks ago did not have Carter ranked as high. So he just recently put Carter a lot higher. I think a lot of people have been a little bit higher on Carter over the past couple of weeks because he's had like 2 or 3 monster games back to back to back. I've been very high on Carter for a while now. In fact, I have a film breakdown that's going to drop tomorrow on Carter. Although he has looked a lot better the past couple of weeks. You know, he's been very good. Even last year's really good, right? Last year he did play like 80% of his snaps at linebacker, but he's now a full-time edge. And the guy's been flashing. He's had a lot of really, really good reps and high quality wins as well. I agree with Abdul Carter being ranked super high. The guy I'm not 100% sure with is going to be Mykel Williams out of Georgia. And it's not that I don't like Mykel Williams, right? I think he has a ton of upside, right? But I almost feel like Mykel Williams right now is going to be ranked high more so based off of the height and weight combination that he has and not based off his tape. And I'm not a type of guy that's going to draft based off of you know, like the athletic profile or how tall a guy is or how much a guy weighs, because we've seen guys like Trayvon Walker, Jordan Davis, that it really just hasn't worked out with those two guys. Not saying Trayvon Walker's a full-on bust, but, you know, if you're the number one overall pick, you know, most of the time it's a quarterback that goes number one overall. And if it's not a quarterback, that means that guy has to be, you know, like a game-changing type of player. Otherwise, he's going to be regarded as a bust. And right now, I don't see that from Trayvon Walker. And the thing is, Mykel Williams, you know, 6'5", 265 is what the numbers are right now. He's going to weigh in, I think, a lot closer to like 275, if not higher. And I think a lot of what he's being drafted on is not necessarily the tape. And don't get it twisted. He's good on tape, but I feel like, you know, is he a top 5 pick? I don't know, right? I'm hesitant with a guy like Mykel Williams, especially since this class You look at the defensive ends, you look at the outside linebackers. It's very, very, very good. Like, this is one of the better classes we've seen over the past 5 years at that position. I think there's like 6 or 7 really good players that can essentially play edge in the NFL. Is Mykel Williams the second best? I think it's debatable. And then you got Mason Graham at number 5. I'm not a huge fan of Graham. I think this D tackle class is on the weaker side. Although there's depth, right? There's guys who can in the second or third round that can end up being really, really good. I'm just not sure if Mason Graham is the 5th best, player in this class. Now, I understand, quarterbacks, you'll probably get like 3 or 4 in the first round, and positional value, all those type of things matter. But being ranked as the number 5 player in this class, I don't personally agree with it. And this is probably the only 2 guys I will disagree with Mel Kiper. And honestly, Mykel Williams, I don't even necessarily disagree. But Mason Graham, it's a hard disagree for me right now, right? Maybe that'll change as time kind of goes on. I just don't see it with Mason Graham. Maybe we'll see what ends up happening. Kelvin Banks is going to be the first offensive tackle ranked for Mel Kiper, which, do keep in mind, Kelvin Banks is a junior, so he doesn't have to come out this year, but I think it would be good for him to come out, specifically because this tackle class is on the weaker side. So if you're a team that needs a tackle, right, you're going to take one in the first round. Kelvin Banks, to me, is the best pure tackle in this class. Now, there are a couple other guys that I actually like that I think have more upside, right? Oregon has a really, really, really good tackle in Josh Connerly. He's one of my favorite players in this class. There's a couple other tackles, but I'm not sure if they're all going to end up coming out. It's a weird class, a lot of juniors, and remember, you got to graduate to be able to come out. So, Kelvin Banks, number 1 ranked tackle, also ends up number 6. Nick Scorton's another guy. I don't 100% agree with it, but I do understand it, right? There's not a lot of guys that are 285 pounds, 6'4.5", right? You don't get that type of player at that size making the type of plays this guy has made, but I'm always hesitant with guys that are on the bigger side that are defensive ends, because we've seen guys like Cleveland Barrow bust out, and I just haven't seen it translate, right? The guys that translate are the guys with great hands, great pass rush technique. They're guys that can just beat people using the hands, the quickness, the speed, the athleticism. Usually, if you're power-based, that doesn't always translate. And I think with Scorton, a lot of what he does is based off his frame and his strength, and it doesn't always translate in my opinion, right? So I'm always hesitant with those type of guys. Nick Scorton, not a huge fan of it, but I understand why you have him ranked so high because of the size. But I hesitate with it, right? And so again, this is another guy that I kind of hesitate with. Nick Scorton, Mason Graham are probably the 2 guys that I don't 100% agree with being ranked this high. And then you got Malachi Starks at number 8. Malachi Starks is probably the best defensive player in this class, or at least in my opinion, he's one of the best. The guy's different. He's going to end up getting drafted, I would say, in the top 15. Most safeties don't get drafted that high, but Malachi Starks is similar to Kyle Hamilton, right? Hamilton came out of Notre Dame a couple years back. He was, I think, the 14th overall pick. Malachi Starks is in that same boat. If you're a team, not even like you need a safety, right? Because most teams that need a safety aren't drafting one in the first round, but if you're a team like the Jets, right? The Jets might end up having like the 13th overall pick. You might not need a safety, but if you have a pretty good defense, you can add a guy like this that's an absolute difference maker. I would definitely pull that trigger, and I think Malachi Starks is one of those difference makers, as is Ashton Jeanty, who gets ranked number 9 for Mel Kiper. I think Jeanty kind of speaks for himself at this point. Different type of running back. Jalen Walker is another interesting guy. Walker really, really stepped up when Mykel Williams ended up getting hurt in week 1. This guy's been an absolute stud. Up to this point, very, very versatile, has tremendous upside. I'm not sure if I agree with this either, though, to be 100% honest. Number 10 is a little high for a guy like Jalen Walker. Again, this is a pure pass rusher, right? He's not an off-ball linebacker. He's a guy to get after the quarterback. And is he better than a guy like James Pierce out of Tennessee, who's going to be ranked a lot lower than this, right? I think it's questionable. And then we get the first 2 quarterbacks, and the only 2 quarterbacks that Mel Kiper has in the top 25. Interestingly, he has it with Shedeur Sanders as the 11th and Cam Ward as 12. So he's putting Sanders above Cam Ward at this point, which is very, very interesting. Every scout that I've spoken to up to this point, hasn't been a lot, it's been like 4 guys. Every scout that I've spoken to up to this point has Cam Ward, and 3 of the 4 have Jalen Milroe ahead of Shedeur Sanders. People don't like Shedeur Sanders. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think he has a lot of upside, and he's looked good, right? Sanders has looked really, really good. And another thing you got to keep in mind with Sanders is, I get it, he's at Colorado. But the thing with Sanders is, Sanders has also kind of played for Coach Prime. And I'm not saying Coach Prime's a bad coach, but it's different than when Sanders gets into the NFL and like a guy like Bobby Slowick gets his hands on Shedeur Sanders. Or maybe it's a different, absolute phenomenal play caller. Maybe it's Clay Kubiak or, whoever it ends up being, right? When one of these guys gets their hand on Shedeur Sanders, what's the upside? And I know Colorado has a pretty good offensive coordinator this year in Pat Shurmur, but I just think that a guy like Sanders is still kind of raw. But I think the upside's there, and I think he has a ton of playmaking, as opposed to a guy like Cam Ward. Ward's been in college for a fifth year in college. He has a lot of experience, 3 different schemes, and, it obviously has finally clicked for him as well. But, how much higher is Cam Ward going to get at this point, right? And I think that's just the question mark to kind of keep in mind. If you're asking me, I think Cam Ward's a little bit better than Shedeur Sanders right now, but I think Sanders does have a lot higher of an upside. But I think Jalen Milroe has a lot of upside as well. And he's another guy that I would rank pretty much right there, right? For me, it's 1A, 1B, 1C with those 3 guys. And I also think we're going to end up getting 3 quarterbacks in the top 10 this year. And I think those are going to be the 3 quarterbacks. I also think there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks that end up going back to school. And maybe Milroe ends up going back, but I think he still has 1 year of eligibility left. And you got guys like Miller Moss. You got guys like Quinn Ewers, Drew Aller. These guys can all basically go back to school. I think it would be good for some of these guys to potentially go back to school, especially since a lot of quarterbacks at this point that are young are getting benched. Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson are quarterbacks that have kind of been benched. Over the past couple of years, we've seen guys that, you get more experience. You come in, you have a little bit more success, right? So, I don't know. We'll see what ends up happening. But interestingly, those are your 2 quarterbacks. You got the first wide receiver coming off the board in Tetro McMillan. Unless you think Travis Hunter's a wide receiver, debatable. But McMillan's an interesting player because he's 6'5", 212. I'm personally not a huge fan of it. McMillan's interesting because I forget what bowl it was, but I think it was the All-American Bowl. I think it was last year. He went in, dominated, put himself on the radar of NFL scouts. And although he's been really good, and he had a very, very good game just this past week, I just think that unless you're a guy that can absolutely separate, it's hard to have success. And I don't think he's actually 6'5". I know that's what he's listed at. And you can tell he's tall, but I don't know if he's really, truly 6'5". I looked at National and Bledsoe, and they don't have this guy's official height or weight. So I don't know exactly what he is, but I'm also not sure if I personally like him more than I like Luther Burden. I think Burden's a phenomenal football player. But McMillan's ranked 13th. James Pierce Jr. ranked 14th. Pierce Jr. is the guy that I think I would disagree with Mel Kiper. I would personally put Pierce Jr. a lot higher. Abdul Carter is my number 1 edge player coming out this year. I think he's just a different type of player. Mykel Williams, I'll probably have to revisit once we have another 4 or 5 games of his tape. Although he's looked good the past 2 to 3 weeks, I want to see more of him. But James Pierce is also a guy I have a lot higher than I think most people. And I think a big part of it with Pierce is the fact that, 1, Tennessee's blown out a lot of people, so this guy's come off the field early in games. 2, this guy's raw as hell, and you don't get guys that are 6'5", 240 plus pounds that can move the way this guy moves. I would make the argument the only guy I've ever seen move the way this guy moves is probably Chase Young. And I know Chase Young didn't necessarily, absolutely dominate in college or in when he got to the NFL. But the way Chase Young moved, right? The way how quick he was, how explosive that first step, the change of direction. Maybe Will Anderson's a guy that kind of moves in that same manner. Pierce reminds me a lot of that essentially, right? I'm a lot higher on Pierce. I'd probably put him in, my top 5 if I had to do a top 5. I think he's an absolute superstar caliber player. And keep in mind, SEC, right? It's a different type of football, right? When you're playing at UCLA, you play 1, maybe 2 games. You're playing NFL competition. Pierce is playing NFL competition every week, right? It's just what it is with SEC football. Pierce is one of those guys I really, really like. Kenneth Grant, I think he's a good football player. I don't know if I would agree he's the 15th best player. I think that's a little high. Arante Ursery is the number 2 tackle for Mel Kiper. This one's interesting because he is 6'6", 330. He's on the bigger side. He's strong. He's physical. But is he fast enough? Is he quick enough? Or NFL team's going to hold that against him a little bit? Because it's one of the things that I've been hearing. All right, Erstry has a ton of upside, but the movement might not be great, right? And there's a tackle, Charles Grant. If you guys don't know who that is, Google him. He's coming out of, I think it's William and Mary. A lot of what I'm hearing from scouts is this guy's a lot higher on the radar than what people realize. This guy's a potential first-round pick. Our tackle class this year is going to be a lot different than I think we've seen in past years. In past years, we knew Olu Fashanu was one of the highest graded tackles. We knew Joe Alt and some of these other guys over the past years are the highest ranked tackles. This year's, we don't really know, right? I think by the time the year comes to an end, December, January comes around, our tackles are going to flip a lot, right? Kelvin Banks might not be the number one. It might be Charles Grant. Maybe that flips as well. Maybe it's not Grant. Maybe it's, Josh Connerly or, maybe it's Emory Jones. Who knows, right? Like, we could see a lot of this kind of flip, but I'm not sure if I agree with Erstry either. I know personally, NFL teams value quickness and speed at the tackle position. It's why DeJuan Jones had some of the greatest tape you'd ever see, but he ended up being, a third-round pick. Quickness matters with tackles in the NFL, right? It really, really matters, and I'm just not sure if Erstry has shown to me this year that he can handle speed consistently. Walter Nolan, love Walter Nolan's tape, man. And I'm glad that Mel Kiper is giving this guy credit. I think 2 weeks ago, Nolan was another guy that was not ranked very high. I think he was actually unranked for Mel Kiper in this listing specifically. But Walter Nolan's one of those guys you got to keep an eye on because he could end up becoming the best or the highest ranked defensive tackle coming out, right? There's a lot of upside with this kid. Luther Burden was my number one wide receiver early on in the process. Hasn't been great this year, right? Like, statistically, it hasn't been great. Some people think a part of that could be because of the fact that Missouri's, quarterback play isn't great, right? There's some issues there. It's tough, right? SEC. I don't know. It's definitely one of those interesting things, but I will say this with a guy like Luther Burden, there's tremendous upside. NGS, which is one of the scouting agencies out there, it's what probably most of the teams use in the NFL. NGS had a grade on Luther Burden as their number one guy, right? NGS had this guy as their number one guy, and the grade was there. I think it was like a 7.5, and then the second guy was like a 7.1, right? Like, second overall guy, right? This guy was graded so much higher than all the other guys, and I see why he had that grade, right? Like, this guy's different, right? He's absolutely different. You can see it on tape, right? He's quick. He's elusive. He's 5'11", right? So he's not super tall. I think he runs good routes. I think he can create separation. He kind of reminds me like of a mixture of a guy like Deebo Samuel, where he's strong and he can break tackles. He can make people miss. And then at the same time, he could run routes and create separation like we see a guy like Jamar Chase. He's like a mixture of that, right? He's not as good as either of those two things. He's like a mixture of those two guys, right? And I think he's going to be a really good wide receiver. It's going to be interesting, right? Some people have Travis Hunter ranked high. Some people have it as McMillan. Other people will have it as Burden. I'm going to take Burden at least right now. I think he's going to be the number one wide receiver coming out this year. That could change. Ty Felton out of Maryland's another guy to keep an eye on. Really, really like the wide receiver out of Maryland. Ton of upside there. Will Campbell's the guy that's kind of seen his stock fall a little bit. Will Campbell, I've been saying this. If you guys have followed this channel, you guys know I have been saying this. Will Campbell is not an offensive tackle in the NFL. We've talked about this multiple times. 6'6", height does check out, right? I think he's like 6'5", and 6'5". I think it's 6'5", the official number, so I think that's 6'10". I think it's out of 10, but 6'5", 06, that's his official height. So he's closer to 6'6" than he is to 6'5". But the arm length's a big concern, and teams don't value Will Campbell as a tackle because of the arm length. So kind of like how we saw Peter Skronsky and even this past year, Jordan Morgan of the Green Bay Packers, how we saw these guys have phenomenal tape, but then they get valued as guards. I think Will Campbell's going to fall in that same boat. And I'm not surprised that we're already seeing that slip kind of happening, right? Will Campbell's a top 3 player just 8-9 weeks back, and now he's kind of slipping a little bit. And I think a part of that is because you're seeing it on tape that he struggles sometimes handling guys that are longer, guys that are a little bit more explosive, guys that, change direction and those type of things. Campbell's going to be a great guard in the NFL. Don't get it wrong. I think he might be the best linemen in this class, overall offensive lineman. But he's a guard, not a tackle, in my opinion. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's not a first-round pick. I would not be surprised. Shavon Revel Jr., unfortunately, tore his ACL, but tape-wise, the tape checks out. I think he has to come out this year. I don't think he has another year of college left unless he was able to redshirt. I should have probably checked that. But the tape checks out. Some team's going to draft this kid in the second round and get one of the best corners in the NFL, right? So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. Benjamin Morris, I like his tape. Not super high on Morrison. One of the things I did this year, which is different than past years, is I started way earlier. I started watching tape probably back in June for the Hula Bowl, right? Some of you guys know this. I got a job with the Hula Bowl as a scout. I started doing the O-line, D-line way earlier, which gave me a lot of time to do all these guys as well. Usually I don't watch cornerbacks. I don't watch running backs and receivers. That's not something I generally did coming into this year. But because I actually got a job on the NFL draft side, I got to watch some of these guys, right? So these corners are some of these guys I watch. Benjamin Morrison, there's upside, right? Don't get it wrong. There's upside. Not 100% sure if it's going to translate. I do like some of his ball skills, but I'm just not 100% sure if it'll translate, right? He's not super long. He's not super tall. I know he's listed at 6 feet. I don't even know if this guy's 6 feet, right? He doesn't look 6 feet to me on tape. So we'll see if that actually checks out. You got the first tight end here in Tyler Warren. I personally love the Bowling Green tight end. But Tyler Warren, some people have ranked as the number 1 tight end. Some people don't even have Fannin. I think it's Fannin, is how you say him. Some people don't even have him ranked as a tight end, which is interesting. Some people have him ranked as like a fullback / H-back. I don't know why we're doing H-back rankings. Let's just call him a tight end, right? Because he's not a fullback. We know that for a fact. H-back would be someone that's like, they line up in the backfield. They're guys that are going into motion a lot. They're essentially playmakers, right? It's kind of like Brock Bowers. Some people would list him as an H-back as opposed to a tight end. It is what it is, right? Tyler Warren, I do like his tape a lot. I think there's a ton of upside with Tyler Warren. I'm not sure if you're going to say, hey, Tyler Warren's a first-round pick. I don't know. That's debatable, right? I think the Bowling Green tight end has some first-round upside because of the playmaking abilities. I'm not 100% sure. I always hesitate with taking tight ends, though, to be honest. 23, you got Josh Simmons. Loved his tape. Unfortunately, he had a season-ending injury. Loved his tape, though, right? The guys looked really, really good up to that point. There's a ton of upside with him. Colston Loveland ranks 24th. And then Nick Emawori ranked 25th. Mel Kiper, man, this is one of his guys right here, right? Because people were not talking about this guy until Mel Kiper started talking about this guy. So shout out to Mel for giving this kid giving this kid a little bit of, how do I say it? A little bit of recognition, right? And then we'll just look at the quarterback ranking. It's the only ranking I want to look at. So Mel Kiper also ranks every position. With the quarterbacks, you guys can see he has Shedeur Sanders 1, he has Cam Ward 2, and then he has Jalen Milroe 3, right? And that's kind of what I thought as well, right? Is I think Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are 1, 2, and 3. Although there's obviously a drop-off when you have Cam Ward ranked 11 and 12 with him and Sanders, and then Milroe's not even ranked in the top 25. So there's obviously some drop-off from Mel Kiper. And then he has Carson Beck still ranked fairly high. I don't personally agree with that at all. Quinn Ewers, Drew Aller, Garrett Neismeyer's another guy that's kind of seen the stock rise a little bit. Curtis Roker out of Indiana, Jackson Dart, Will Howard. Interestingly, he doesn't have Miller Moss up here, which I guess doesn't make sense. Mel Kiper would probably know if Miller Moss is going to graduate. Although I think Miller Moss actually this is his 4th year in college. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. It's going to be an interesting quarterback class, man. I think, from the people that I've spoken to, the quarterback class this year is different. Some people have certain guys ranked in certain spots. Other guys ranked in other spots. Some guys are ranked 1. Others are ranked 5. Vice versa. This quarterback class is an interesting class, right? I also think the quarterback position in the NFL is at one of those points where, quarterbacks matter in the NFL, but I think teams are starting to recognize your offensive coordinator and your play caller matter just as much, if not more, right? Obviously, you got Patrick Mahomes, who's a phenomenal quarterback, and we don't really know what he would be like without Andy Reid. We know what Kyle Shanahan is without Brock Purdy. We've seen that. We know what a guy like, Bobby Slowick did for CJ Stroud. Now, next year, we're going to find out what CJ Stroud actually is as a quarterback. I think people have started to recognize, hey, maybe it wasn't Deshaun Watson that was good for like those 2 years. Maybe he had a little coordinator that was a good football player. Maybe, Dan Quinn was a good head coach, or maybe it was Kyle Shanahan was a great offensive coordinator that took that Falcons team to the Super Bowl, right? I think teams are starting to recognize if Sean McVay can take Jared Goff to a Super Bowl, and if Ben Johnson can get him close as well, the way we'll probably see this year, if we can see guys like Mike McDaniel take a quarterback who most people had written off as a bust and then kind of revive his career a little bit, if we can see all these different things happening with these play callers, maybe quarterbacks don't matter as much, right? And maybe there's also that recognition with guys like Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson that, you don't really need a young quarterback. You can potentially get a veteran guy and have more success. At the same time, maybe you want these guys to either have more experience, or maybe you want them to ultimately sit a little bit. All right, I think teams are recognizing things a little bit different. You look at the Packers. It's been 3 different quarterbacks over the last 40 years that these guys have ultimately ended up having, and all 3 of them basically sat, right? And they all sat, they all learned, they all developed, and they all have come in and have had a lot of success. The Steelers have shown us, you can have Justin Fields, you can have Russell Wilson, and you can make playoffs with that, right? So I think the quarterback position is going to start being valued a little bit different. And we'll see what ends up happening, man. I do think that we're going to see some quarterbacks get taken in the first round. I also think there's teams that are going to be playoff caliber teams this year, right? Teams like the Steelers, although the Steelers kind of need a quarterback. But I think the Steelers will draft a quarterback, even if they have like a bottom 15 pick in the first round, right? Even if we make playoffs and, they'll still take a quarterback just to develop a guy. I think a team like the Dolphins, even a team like the Chiefs, like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Chiefs end up drafting one of these quarterbacks at the end of the first round, right? It might be like the 5th quarterback, like Quinn Ewers. If he's still available and you think this guy has a lot of upside, why not draft him, develop him, and then potentially trade him, right? I think there's always teams willing to give up picks for a good quarterback, right? So we'll see what ends up happening, man. Let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing. We do have a film breakdown of Abdul Carter dropping tomorrow, so stay on the lookout for that. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.